In this lesson, we're going to look at the properties of increasing or decreasing, and then are the graphs positive or negative, or functions. So I want to make sure that we distinguish between the two. They're not difficult, but they are easy to get mixed up, and that's usually where students end up having some trouble. So when we talk about increasing versus decreasing, we're looking at the slope, okay? So we can have a positive slope, we can have a negative slope, or it could be neither. We could have a constant slope, okay? So if the graph is increasing, then the function itself is going up in value. So we're moving up the y-axis, which means if we're moving up the y-axis that it has a positive slope. And make sure you're looking at these the same way that we would read a line in a text, left to right. Okay, so note I drew them left to right. Okay, that'll help you keep you from getting confused. Okay, decreasing means the graph is going down in value and that we have a negative slope. Okay, and if it isn't increasing or decreasing, then we say that it is constant. Okay, let's look at some examples. With our linear function, okay, increasing on the interval. So again, we're looking for that interval notation, okay? For this case, it increasing means a positive slope, okay? So I'm looking for that positive slope, which would be the entire graph, okay? If I highlight increasing with yellow, that is the one that has a positive slope to it. Okay, and then decreasing, I don't have any, okay, and I don't have any that are constant. So increasing on the interval, that would be negative infinity to positive infinity, okay, and then decreasing would be, let's see, none, NA, no solution, okay. All right, let's take a look at the quadratic function. Again, I'm going to go ahead and highlight. It helps keep my eyes focused. Increasing means I have a positive slope. Okay, so I'm angled up, which is going to be this side of my graph. Decreasing is going to be a negative slope or a downhill, okay, which is going to be this side of my graph. So if it asks me where I'm increasing, I am increasing from 0, and then remember these go on forever, so all the way to infinity. I'm not going to include the 0 because technically it has 0 slope right at 0. So I'm going to keep it open. I believe most of your questions on your lesson checks are going to ask what interval is it greater than or equal to 0. Okay, in which if this were the question, then I would have to include my 0 with my solution, or I could say x was greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so up here, increasing, I'm not going to include it because it's technically not increasing right at 0. So x has to be positive. And then decreasing is going to be negative infinity to 0, or x is less than 0. Okay, and then let's take a look at the cubic function. Increasing is when it is upward, okay, and that's the entire graph. Decreasing, we don't have any that's decreasing. So increasing would be all real numbers, or negative infinity to positive infinity, and then we do not have any intervals where it's decreasing. Okay, that is where we're looking at the slope. So notice I can have an increasing function that is below the x-axis. So that's what we're getting ready to look at next. Okay, now when they ask positive or negative, they're asking it, is it above the x-axis? So is my function positive? That would be my y values. Okay, so everything above the x-axis is positive and everything below the x-axis is negative. So if you draw your line and highlight your x-axis, okay, that kind of helps you. Above is going to be positive functions and below is going to be negative. That simply means when we plug in any value for x, what kind of number are we going to get? Okay, so if we plug in numbers over here, like x equals 5, my graph is up here at positive 5, so my function is positive. On the left side, if I plug in -5, then my function becomes -5, and I have a negative function, even though it's increasing on the entire graph. Okay, so it's increasing on all real numbers, or the entire realm of x-axis, but it's negative when x is less than 0, and it's positive when x is greater than 0. Okay, so let's go ahead and fill that in. So it's positive on the interval. So this means when I'm looking for positive, I'm looking for above this y or this x-axis. So that would be this section here. Okay, that is going to be, I skipped this part, sorry. It's positive if the function is in quadrants 1 or 2. Okay, and then it's negative if your graph is in quadrants 3 or 4. And remember, they go like this: 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so around clockwise. Okay, so we're positive on the interval of, let's see, 0 to infinity, or you could say x was greater than 0. Okay, and then negative is going to be where we are below the x-axis. So that's this segment down here, and that would be -infinity to 0, or x is less than 0. Okay, and again, be careful, because your Delta Math can ask you when your function is less than or equal to 0, or it could say when your function is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so make sure you're looking at the directions to know if you're including the 0 or not. Okay, our quadratic function. So again, I'm just going to mark where my x-axis is, and then notice, what do I see about my graph? Well, the whole thing is above. It's in quadrants 1 and 2, so that means the whole thing is positive. So -infinity to positive infinity, or all real numbers. And when we say negative on the interval, we would say no solution, NA, none, because we do not have the function below the x-axis. All right, and then the last example, our cubic function. Here's my y-axis, and then our positive graph. Okay, function in quadrants 1 or 2 would be here, and then our negative is going to be below the x-axis. So positive on the interval, again, 0 to infinity, or x is greater than 0. And then negative, so it's below the x-axis from -infinity to 0. So remember, you're writing your values from least to greatest. So -infinity is lower than x. Okay, -infinity would be out here. Or x is less than 0. Okay, all right, you can go ahead and do the check your understanding. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.